A presentation on Australian oil, supply and demand over the next decade. Is oil becoming a phased-out resource within Australia, or remaining a much-required commodity? This short video gives an insight into an oil rig that is drilling for oil. Australia's oil security is in a far more sensitive position than most might realise. Oil prices change quickly in response to news cycles, policy changes, and fluctuations in the world's market. So, what influences these swings in the supply and demand, and what can we expect moving forwards? This presentation provides a market forecast based on the economic-centric demand and supply model for oil in Australia, including non-price determinants for supply and demand, the potential risks in supply, and also opportunities for this resource. This graph represents the previous decade of oil supply and demand in Australia. As can be observed during the previous decade, the demand for oil in Australia fluctuated, as did the supply. Strong economic growth and industrial production tends to boost the demand for oil. Oil demand has been heavily influenced for a plethora of reasons, including international relations, political instability, economic and environmental reasons. Other important non-price determinants that affect the demand for oil include transportation, population growth, and seasonal changes. It is also worth noting that more market participants are buying and selling oil, not in its physical form, but in the form of contracts. For example, industries that rely heavily on oil, like an airline, use derivatives like futures and options to try and control the swings in the price of oil. This graph provides an indication of what the demand for oil looks like as we transition into the next decade. Non-price determinants of the supply of oil can be determined by many external factors, some which might include weather patterns, exploration and production, costs, investments, innovations, and new technology. In addition, oil prices react to many variables, including economic news, overall supplies, and consumer demand. A global upset, like the coronavirus. OPEC is an international oil-producing body that plays an important role in determining global oil supply. This graph shows a supply curve for oil for the next decade, indicating, based on the demand and supply model, that there will be a surplus of oil due to a declining demand. This graph demonstrates the comparison between demand and supply curves across the next decade. This graph depicts a drop in demand, as indicated from D1 to D2, and an increase in the quantity of oil as indicated from S1 to S2. The way we supply and use oil in Australia continues to change. These changes include how we obtain, how we store, new technologies we adopt, and our awareness for the new energy options. Australians are becoming more aware of their environmental footprint. They're investigating different options to the conventional energy supplies of the past. Whilst renewables are fast becoming the new oil, these sources of energy currently only account for approximately 6 to 8% of the energy consumption. It could have been suggested in 2019 that the greatest challenges in 2020 for the oil sector was going to be a combination of weaker predictions in economic growth, a changed climate in relation to trade tensions, and global political differences. The COVID-19 crisis has had a massive impact on the oil sector. Due to this global event, the industry has seen a massive change in supply and demand. There are several cleaner than oil options being explored globally. One of these is a growing international agreement that clean hydrogen will play a critical role in the world's transition to a sustainable energy future. This new clean opportunity from oil is regarded as an efficient transport fuel, similar to petrol and diesel, but with no pollution problems. Interestingly, this process can be applied to mainstream oil fields. The main restriction to renewable hydrogen is cost. However, as more investments are made into this emerging market, there are promising signs that it could become more affordable sooner rather than later. This presentation has given an interesting insight into the Australian oil market, supply and demand over the next decade. There are promising new opportunities in this space as there are risks, but as Australia looks forwards to the next decade and beyond, being more self-sufficient will be critical to our success. Who is better positioned than Saudi Arabia to provide some concluding food for thought? Saudi Minister for Oil states, "The Stone Age didn't end for lack of stone, and the oil age will end long before the world runs out of oil."